Jersey Dude back again, looking at Alexa's logo. Here we have the original design on the left. This is the one I created. Yeah, you see some differences in how they look. Mine is a little crisper, and they look different in different levels of zoom. You come in a little closer, some things tighten up. This looks a little ratty over here, but I think it was stitched just fine. A lot of times you see a lot of details on the screen, and frankly you just won't even notice them when it stitches. Let's start looking at this lettering down here. Lettering is a tricky thing. You may not find a font that you like in the supplied fonts with the software. You might be tempted to create your own. That is a tricky deal. You learn after a while. If you study the fonts, you start looking at, well, how do the digitized fonts, how are they made up? You break them apart, you get them in the reshape mode and look at the nodes and the pieces, and they look insane. Why do they make all these pieces? You could easily just do this out of one piece and it would stitch fine. Guess what? They don't. Case in point, this M is made out of one piece, and that's very tempting. It's very tempting to try to do that. Even like this A is made of 3 pieces. You might actually find the digitized font would be made out of 3 pieces. And why would they do that? Why would you not just make it out of one piece? Well, these things don't always stitch right. They just don't. And it's a funny thing, you have to wrap your head around it, but in the end, those crazy looking fonts that some digitizer has made, they actually knew what they were doing because they stitch well. They don't necessarily look great on the screen, but they stitch well. That's the point, after all, eh? So, we see numerous problems here. We have a lot of different line thicknesses. The height goes up and down all over the place. The colors also kind of throw your eye off because the different colors will lend different weights to the letters. Let me go in and start with how I like to digitize my own letters. Now that I've learned a little bit, no, those digitizers weren't crazy, and those letters they created weren't so stupid as I thought at first. They actually work pretty well in most cases. Whether you like the font or not, whether it matches what you're looking for, that's a totally different issue. But they do stitch well, even though they look bonkers. First off, once again, I am a grid guy. I like to create reference lines. I like to be able to have consistency across my design. So I'm going to start out by drawing a reference line. There's one for the bottom. There's one for the bottom. And move that down a little bit, and I'm going to change the color. Yeah, whatever. Black. Let's go black. I'm going to create another one. Arrow keys, move it up to the top. I'll just use the M here as a reference. And there we go. There is our top and bottom. You can see that these are all over the place in terms of height and size to some extent. So I'm going to look at this piece and see how this is actually put together. Oh my, look at all of that. That actually looks like it was done using a digitized blocks tool. A lot of extraneous information in here. Stitches are not very close together. It's kind of rangy looking. 0.18. Let's bump that down to 14. It should improve quite a bit, but still, no. So let's start with a default here. Let's pick how thick do we want the columns of these letters to be. Let's choose the I. The I is a basic column here. Let me grab this, and I'm going to, no, this is set wrong. but I'll change it. Once again, I did not designate it first. It's set to line. I will change it to fill, and I will change it to that. Default is 015. I changed to 014. And there is my first piece. So that's going to be what I will call my reference column. And in order to make all the letters uniform, I'll make a whole bunch of copies. I'll move one over here. And I'll duplicate again, and I'll move one over here. I'll just keep duplicating. And I'll make all of my columns the same. It's arguably a little bit thick, but it will work just fine. Yeah, see how slow that is? I mentioned previously, if you zoom out, they move a lot faster. So I'm not going to worry about positioning that. I'll make a duplicate, move it over real quick here, get them roughly in position, then I'll zoom back in, finalize their positioning here. Oh, let's say there. Now I could get fussy and worry about widths. If you study fonts at all, you'll find out that some letters like M's and W's and so on are much thicker or wider than other letters. So there we've got some columns that we've made. Now, to create these guys here, these other portions of the M, why don't I take this guy, I will duplicate again. Now watch, I'm going to double select and get to the skew portion. Let's see what we get if we simply, now I'm going to parallel this. That's pretty good. It doesn't look too bad, huh? So, I'll make another one. I need a second one. I can just duplicate, mirror X. I'm not sure what that just did. Why that looks like that. I'm not really sure why that did that. That's kind of odd. Why am I missing half of the letter? Is my software letting me down yet again? No. I just changed the stitch angle a little bit and that fixed it. I'm not sure why, but alright, now I need to move this column in slightly. And that looks pretty good. That should be a reasonably good letter right there. I wonder if I can square these bottoms up a bit. Yeah, I can by zeroing out the stitch angle. That'll square up the bases of those. Square up the stitch angle. There. Now, that will make a pretty nice M. I would have been tempted, and I was tempted right at the start of my digitizing career, to make letters such as this out of one line. Well, guess what? They don't really work very well that way. They just don't. I had to learn that the hard way. There are reasons why they make things out of pieces like this. And this letter is a perfect example. There are plenty of them. So we've got those components made. Let's choose all of those guys. Which ones go to our M? These last four go to our M. Select them all using the shift key and go down and branch these together. Now you've got an M. Let it stitch however it wants to stitch. You won't really notice the differences too much. They'll be just fine. Now, I can do the same thing. Let's see now. I made a bunch of these and I should have corrected this before I copied all those. Now I'm going to have to do it a million times. Zeroing out this stitch angle at the bottom to square them up. Now I'm going to duplicate. This guy. Select that block, duplicate. I'm going to move it over. I'm going to start to make my A. And again, I'm in close, so that the arrow key motion, the movement is extremely slow. If I move back away, it gets a lot faster. That's a red letter. I'm going to change that to yellow so I can actually see it. I'm going to click it again, get my skew, bring it over. Now I'm looking through the piece I'm creating and sort of paralleling it to the letter that I'm copying. So I've done that. That's pretty square. That's a good part. I will simply duplicate it, mirror X, bring it over with the arrow keys, parallel it. There are two good pieces there. Now, I think that this may be a little thick to make this cross piece in here in the A. I think I'm going to just cheat a little bit and make one freehand. A little bit wider, but not as wide as columns. To Tommy Phil, Satin, 014, reshape, stitch angle up to 90. Here we are. There's that piece. I'll change it to yellow. I will bump it as the first piece to stitch. Once I branch that, it may not actually stay that way, but when you branch it, whatever order it wants to stitch it in, let it ride. It's going to do what it's going to do most of the time anyway, and quite frankly, you won't really see, in most cases, any difference in the stitch sequencing of those pieces. So, Shift key, select all three, over to branching. Yeah, see, it popped it out to the front. Yeah, on here it looks dumb. When it actually stitches the thing, I don't really think you're going to notice it. Let's see if we can do something. Edit objects, break that back apart again. Let's try. Let's just see what happens. Now, beginning point, end point. Let's try something here. Let's see where beginning and end is on this guy. Let's put the beginning point down here next to the end point of that crossbar. Now let's see. Yeah, this one's all screwy. Let's run this down here. Beginning point here. Where did I do that? End. Beginning. Let's see what this does. If you play around with the beginning and end point, sometimes you can keep this crossbar in the background. We'll see if it stays there or not. I've played around with that a few times, and you can actually change the stitch angle ultimately. We'll see what it does. Branching. And there it did. Perfect example. By switching the beginning and end points around, I assumed that this piece would stitch first. Beginning, end. Then I move the beginning point of the next piece near the end point of the previous. And that I went through that sequence. In some colors, in some circumstances, that might actually look substantially different. It may not matter depending on your application, but if it does, yes, indeed, you can play around with a stitch angle and get that piece in the back. That looks better to me. Now, we've got this part of the end I fixed, this part of the end I didn't. Let's fix these two while I'm thinking about it. Stitch angle, 0, stitch angle. Before I go copying more of them and making more work for myself, I'll fix these now. Okay, there's those two fixed. Let's make a copy of this guy. Duplicate, click again to get the skew mode, tip it sideways, match the angle, bada bing. There we have the cross piece for the N. Now we've, let's see, that one and that one, so I need to move these two down to be with their crossbar. Now I would prefer that to stitch first. Let's see what the software gives me if I just branch them together. See what it does. Yeah, okay, that works. You're stitching up this column, down this cross, up this column, or vice versa actually. This would be the first side to stitch, then that, then this. That's fine. The I is complete. Now you would do the rest of these letters in a similar fashion and end up with proper letters.